Hi, this is Francis Sideco. Thanks for joining us today. I am here with my colleague Jim McGregor, who has just spent a heck of a week out in Delaware, witnessing, not as a witness, but actually witnessing the court case between ARM and Qualcomm on the dispute that's been brewing for the last couple of years since the Nuvia acquisition. Let's delve right into it. Jim, what are some initial thoughts that you had as you were sitting there? Maybe take us through even from just the opening statements.
Well, first off, you have to think of how did it get here? I mean, we're talking about two companies. This is Qualcomm is the biggest customer of ARM that have worked together and for decades. And ARM is kind of like Switzerland of the semiconductor industry, working with
Yeah.
everyone, enabling the industry. And these two companies created so many markets and really enabling smartphones and mobile devices and all this stuff. So you got to wonder, how did two companies that had to work so closely together get to this point to where, one is suing the other and it's countersuits and everything else? It is just kind of phenomenal to think of that. Now, with that said, there's been a lot of changes at both companies over the past decade. This is not just a couple of years, but decade in terms of ownership, in terms of management, in terms of, business strategies. So it's unfortunate that they're here. I think they're here primarily due to a very confusing and poorly written contract. And that would be what's referred to as the Nuvia Architecture License Agreement, or ALA.
Yeah, why don't we? I mean, that seems to be the crux of the issue here, right? If it was written, and we don't know what caused it to be written this way, but it was. But if it was written a little bit clearer and maybe more standard, we probably wouldn't be here today.
Well, I need to reiterate here, we don't, and nobody does, have access to these full agreements because they're confidential. But obviously, ARM has some standard terminology. But just what's come out in the trial, they're drastically different. Qualcomm has a drastically different ALA than Nuvia did. Some of the terminology in Nuvia is kind of confusing. Nuvia added in specific terminology to define its IP because it wanted to protect its IP. Don't blame it for that. But there's also some terms in there about ARM having the right to approve an acquisition, and the request to terminate anything that's developed after the termination of upon termination of the agreement. Things that I don't think are in other ALAs, or obviously weren't in the Qualcomm ALA.
Well,
And it really created a lot of confusion, I think, and a lot of overhead. I even wondered to some point if some of this terminology is actually legal, but we'll see.
I think one big difference is the fact that Nuvia is the only company of this profile to have an ALA. The other handful of ALA licensees are all large established companies from what I remember. Only Nuvia is really the only startup type. Most of them are TLA licensees.
Yes, and the difference is TLA is just licensed standard ARM cores, and you're absolutely correct there. This is probably the first time ARM has licensed the ability to create custom ARM compatible cores to any startup.
And
And they even recognized, I think, through some of the testimony that came through that, there was a potential downside here if one of their large TLA customers acquired Nubia.
yeah. Or ALA customers, like what actually happened.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, we this is 3 or 4 days of testimony and closing arguments. Probably don't have time in this podcast to go through every single one of them. Do you have like maybe 1 to 3 things that came out in the testimony that really stood out to you?
Yeah, well, first off, I read all the pre-trial public documents, and what was presented in trial really had nothing to do with those pre-trial documents. So it has been a bit confusing, and obviously you see twists and turns like you would in any trial. ARM is really hyper focused on the Nubia AVA. Qualcomm is more focused, and this is reflected in their closing statements, on not just the not just the NVIDIA or Nuvia, sorry. I have to get names straight. There's too many ends here. The Nuvia AVA, but also the Qualcomm
ALA.
AVA,
ALA.
ALA. God,
It's been
wow.
a long, it's been a long 4 days, Jim.
It has been a long 4 days. But no, Qualcomm is focused on all the agreements, the timing of the agreements, and the intent of the agreements. And to be honest with you, you never know how a jury's going to go. I mean, you have lawyers or attorneys with limited technical knowledge trying to pull information out of technical experts and communicate it to a non-technical audience in form of the jurors. So it's they have three main choices to decide. One, did Nuvia breach the Nuvia ALA agreement? Two, did Qualcomm breach the Nuvia ALA agreement? And three, and this is part of Qualcomm's countersuit, are all of Qualcomm's CPU designs covered under its Qualcomm ALA agreement. So it is a bit confusing. It's confusing to me, and I'm sitting here and I understand the technology,
Right.
the contract not necessarily. And once again, you see bits and pieces. Matter of fact, both companies have strategically pulled out different pieces of different of the contracts, the same contract in this case, to represent different points, along with testimony from both parties. So it's really it's a very complex situation to really determine. But the crux of this, especially with those questions, is the point of the agreement that is in those questions is the termination agreement. And did Nuvia and Qualcomm act accordingly to the termination agreement? And a key point in that termination agreement is that the party has to stop using ARM technology and destroy any designs and material, any designs using that technology and any material referencing that technology. So it gets very, very complex when you start looking at it from that standpoint. And that may be a big ask. I mean, depending on what that timeline is. Qualcomm says that, at the point of the acquisition, there was only 1% of the IP or the RTL code actually contained ARM IP, and that would just be the opcodes. I'm not going to go through the explanation of that here. But and all the hardware technology was really Nuvia. And now, and that, by the time the termination agreement, there was nothing there. Obviously, ARM is arguing the other way, that there is ARM or information from the ARM ISA or instruction set architecture
Yeah.
in the RTL code beyond that point, and in the existing or the resulting Qualcomm designs that have come after that. And they're asking for destruction of those. So that's, and obviously any performance after has to come after the decision. So right now it's really just a discussion of, is there a breach? If there was, then that goes to the next step, where what has to take place according to that breach. If there wasn't a breach, then basically things continue as they have.
Well, that's one of the you brought up a big question is, even if they decide there is a breach, what is considered ARM IP versus not, and what it touches, that's even in dispute. So
Yes.
yeah, so what exactly is to be destroyed? But so let's kind of bring it back a little bit, because there's a lot going on. So let's just summarize it, because like you said, we don't know how the jury's gonna tip on this.
No.
Just who knows what actually came through and how they're interpreting all of that stuff. So let's just handicap it a little bit. What happen if ARM wins? What do you think is going to happen? If Qualcomm wins, what do you think is going to happen? It could be a combination of those two, so we won't go into that quagmire. But just if one wins versus the other, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, if let's go with the easiest case first, and that is if Qualcomm wins, obviously they're pushing to just continue on as is, using the technology they developed in conjunction with the Nuvia engineers for its current and future products.
And they'll continue to do
So no
like
change, and they'll
licensing.
continue. And no, it's important to note that they continue to, even on these new designs, pay royalty rates to ARM, but ARM keeps denying them or sending the funds back or giving the funds back through a credit. So Qualcomm just wants to keep moving forward. If ARM wins, obviously this opens up the door to, what the potential results may be. They can push for the destruction of some of the IP and designs or redesign of some of this stuff. They can push for a new renegotiated ALA, which was one of their key points. They were really pushing Qualcomm to accept the new ALA to transfer these designs, which it claims it has the right to request. And if it does, if Qualcomm accepted the new ALA, it would have been much higher royalty rates.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that, the most likely scenario is that if ARM wins, we're pushing for a renegotiation in some form or another, because destroying all that IP seems a bit unreasonable. And
So,
it wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be good for the ARM ecosystem.
well, and it
So
would probably and it would shoot Arm in the foot too, because they lose all those royalty payments that would come from the productization of those products.
yes, and note that right now that's pretty much limited to the latest generation of Snapdragon Elite processors that are going into these AI PCs since the middle of this year, and products that are currently shipping for the next generation of Android-based flagship smartphones that'll be coming out in early 2025.
So, so one thing though that strikes me is regardless of which way the jury decides, just the fact that we've had this court case seems like it already has could have some downstream implications that might not be all that positive for ARM. Not the least of which is you've got other alternative ISAs out there that licensees or potential licensees might start looking at this and go, hey, if they're willing to go after their single largest licensee, maybe we might want to start looking at some alternatives here.
Well, that also in conjunction with they've had a program to raise royalty rates amongst their licensees. So with higher prices and also a more aggressive strategy, yeah, it would definitely create cause for concern. I mean, obviously, Qualcomm has to think about what it's going to do towards the end of its ALA license, which they have the right. It expire or it goes through 2028, but they have a 5-year right to extend it at $1 million per year and through 2033. But they have to be thinking about what they're going to do, and being the largest
Yeah.
ARM licensee, that has an impact on the ARM ecosystem, ARM, and everyone else. So yeah, I think it's definitely going to create a harder look at working with and licensing ARM technology by pretty much the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, between you and me, just as an not having been in the court case like you have, but just looking at this, it seems like even if ARM wins, they lose, just because of that situation.
There are potential downsides. Yeah, and I would agree that this ARM has the right to definitely enforce and protect its IP. Won't argue that. I think every company has the right to do that, especially in the technology industry. But there are a lot of downsides, and you have to weigh what the potential is for all those potential impacts before you proceed with something like this. And ARM has pretty much said all along until recently that there was no harm to ARM. So to go after a licensee or a top licensee, a top customer of ARM, a top partner of ARM, definitely has its drawbacks. But on the other side, ARM is also claiming that this is a potential huge loss of potential revenue to them. Qualcomm, and there's different numbers being thrown around. They estimated $50 million, but Qualcomm was estimating that they're going to save $1.4 billion a year in royalty rates, which quite honestly just ironically just happened to be the value or the rate or the price that they acquired Nuvia at.
Yeah.
So it, yeah, it's going to be interesting. And ARM kind of created this situation decades ago when it created these two business models.
Yeah.
You know, one is where they license cores and technology, and the other is where they just license their instruction set to compatible cores and technology, which compete directly with ARM's own cores and technology. So they created a situation quite a while ago, but it really hasn't been an issue until recently.
Well,
Um,
I think it was that decision to potentially license a startup. Up until then, having ALA licensees that are more established, that where you kind of know what you're
yes.
dealing with, I think made more sense. So, just wrapping it up a little bit, what's the next steps and any closing thoughts, Jim?
Next step is obviously you have to wait to see what the verdict is from the jury. They have to be unanimous on each decision. So there can be three different decisions between those three questions, but each one has to be unanimous. If they don't reach a verdict today, from what I understand, deliberations will start again in January 3rd, because there's a holiday break there. And then it'll continue on. And we'll see if there's a verdict. There's a possibility of a hung jury. There's a possibility of a split verdict on different decisions or different questions, or one that goes straight across the board in one way or the other. So we'll have to wait and see. And once again, there are two questions that are formed by basically by ARM, the plaintiff, and one in the countersuit by Qualcomm. So there are really two different cases here that are kind of being tried at the same time.
Do the jury have to be, I hope not, do they have to be sequestered through that time if it goes through?
No,
Okay.
no, no. They would be
Oh,
released.
that
They
was
are basically they're under guard when they're in the courthouse, and they're not allowed to talk about it, other than to the other jurors. But other than that, I don't know what's going to happen. But right now, the fact that we didn't reach a decision yesterday kind of tells me that this is going to drag on a bit. And
well, actually, that leads to maybe one last question. If it is a hung jury, what happens? Do Qualcomm in effect get what they're already going for anyway, which is status quo, or does it get appealed or what?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's the possibility it could go to the judge's decision. It could lead to another trial. It could result in the two coming to an agreement. Don't know.
Okay.
It's wide open at this point.
Very cool. Well, Jim, it's been a long 4 days for you with with big long days in the courthouse and then writing up your thoughts. So thanks for doing that for us and for really the industry at large, being able to see kind of into the courtroom with you.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Bye.